Hey, y'all, welcome back to the Decolonizing Christian podcast, where we dismantle harmful theology and reimagine the Christian witness together. Today, we continue our stories of deconstruction, and we have Greg with us today. You guessed it. And we are so thankful for season 1 and what we have been able to talk about. And so we thought it would be a good idea to take a few moments and to pause and reflect on our stories as we are doing this podcast. And so, Greg, how are you today, man?
I'm well. I'm doing quite well. Season 1 was beautiful indeed. And, we covered a lot of different topics in such a short span of time. So, very grateful for that and grateful for the positive feedback we've also been getting and have gotten as well.
Yes. Incredible. It's been incredible, for real.
Yeah.
Thank y'all. So, Greg, can you share a little bit more about your upbringing? I know we talked about it in the About Us before we really launched into some heavy topics. So I would love for you to share a little bit more about your upbringing and how faith has played a role in your life.
Yeah. So faith has played a huge, huge role for me, obviously. As you guys already know, my dad's a pastor. And that was like central for me as a child. I've done church my whole life. And sometimes doing church can have a negative connotation because it can seem like it's just a routine. It's just what you do. Like you just, like you just get into a habit of going. But that happens for people. Like they get into a habit of going to church and they just go because it's what they did as children. And they really didn't gain anything from going. It was just what they did as a norm. But as I got older, I fought against that being my narrative because I did desire to know God more and know God on a deeper level, and form my own relationship with God. And so, even from a young age, I've always had an interest in theology. I remember in high school, I was the go-to Bible person. I was the one. And people would come and ask questions. Like I remember I had a really good friend. We took French together. This was my junior year. Like I was just that person for him. Or if he went to church the previous day, he wanted to come back and tell me what he learned about church. So like that was really my experience. And of course, as a teenager, I'm in a different place now, but that I can see how me being that way as a teenager might not have been the healthiest for me because there are a lot of things that we're taught just growing up in church, like deny yourself, consider others higher than you, and sometimes those things are meant to translate well, but they don't often translate well, especially if you're not given the tools. So, for example, my parents didn't teach me about having healthy boundaries. That was something I had to learn on my own. I had to learn how to do that on my own as an adult. And so ultimately, what happens is you grow up with this image of Christ as this meek and humble, meek and humble lamb. It's even in our songs. Like it's so funny. Like I was on Facebook right before we started recording. And there was a post about problematic Christian song lyrics or whatever. And like our theology shapes our songs, Christian songs, gospel songs.
Yep. Absolutely.
And so we're taught that Jesus is this meek, lowly person. And he never riles up. Like honestly, I felt like I had to be a doormat to some extent in order to be Christian. And it took a really good friend of mine, like I call him my personal life coach even now. It took a really good friend of mine to show me. Well, no, that's not what this is. That's not what this should be. And so learning about a different Jesus than the one I kind of grown up with was very, very helpful for me. Um, I read a book that I still would recommend because I think that um, it has some good principles in it. No More Christian Nice Guy.
Hmm.
That I think I shared that with you.
You did that. That was the first book that you were like, you need to
Yes,
read this. We were outside of the church we attended in the
yes, I
parking
remember.
lot, and you're like, this is something you have to
Yes.
read.
Um, and I would still recommend that book, even though now personally I like to read more Black authors. Um, I still
Hmm.
will recommend that book because I know there are people who are not where I am, and they have to, you have to take steps. Um, but it really just addresses this narrative of who people have framed Jesus to be, and it's just like no. And that harms people. It does. It does harm people because you're thinking you're being Christ-like by doing these things, but it's really
Yeah.
not serving you, and it's not serving anyone else, honestly. So
Mm.
yeah, that my faith has definitely um my spiritual formation has blossomed from childhood to where I am now. So yeah.
Hmm. That's awesome. Now, growing up in church and hearing the gospel two, three, four, maybe even five times a week, you have a certain perspective as you grow up, as you've mentioned in your teenage years, and what was meant to be helpful could have been harmful without setting boundaries. So that being said, what does the gospel mean to you now?
Now the gospel is liberation. The gospel is an invitation to love God, love people, um, and eradicating anything that would hinder that from being our reality. Um,
Hmm.
I don't think it's an invitation to proselytize people. I think that if if Christ is the center of a gospel narrative, it has to be good news, like always. So
Yeah.
that is kind of that's just where I how I kind of filter that. I think about like, is this good news to people? Like
Hmm.
because that's literally what gospel means, good news. So I
Yeah.
guess that's a pretty simple answer, but that's just kind of where I land with that now. I think it's about liberating people
Hmm.
to exist fully and wholly, um, healed people. Because I think if you just make it about coming down the aisle and accepting Christ, I think that's irresponsible. I think that's
Mm.
very irresponsible. To just let that be the sum total of the gospel. Um,
Yep.
because it's also very individualistic as well. And that's something I like to push back against these individualistic narratives that we find within Western Christianity. I love to push back against those because I'm like, no, we were created to exist in community. And I think God saves that way. I think God saves in
Mm.
community. So it becomes less about my own personal salvation and how am I liberating other people.
Mm. So, with this new perspective, where have you struggled to see God move through the institution of the church?
Well, honestly, as it relates to LGBT women in pastoral leadership, like I was just talking to someone like a few days ago about women in pastoral leadership. So I very much support women clergy and women senior pastors. Like I'm all about that. But I think that the church, the institution of the church, a lot of things are framed as orthodoxy and they're just simply oppression. That's
Woo.
that
Quoted.
is that I mean, this being real. That's totally how I feel. That is absolutely how I feel. And again, that's something that I'm still working through, but just on its face, that's how I feel about stuff like that. Like that question you just asked is very poignant because I've said before, like the church institutionalizes bigotry, and it's the norm. It's just expected, and this is just how it is. The church isn't going to change. Blah 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 blah. Whatever. Like, and so we just accept it. But for me, I like to push back against that because I'm like, no, this is absolutely. I don't believe that is how God intends or intended for things to be. Um, so I think ultimately, for example, women, if you're telling me that a woman cannot serve in a pastoral leadership, cannot serve at the table that makes the decisions, I call that a patriarchy. That's what I call that. I call it benevolent sexism. That is what I call.
You're coming with all the terms today.
I'm just saying. That is what I call it. Because like at its core, Christianity is not about, and we've made it about it, but Christianity is not about doctrines and creeds. It's about how you live. It's about how you live in relationship to God's creation, to people. That is what it is about.
So with this perspective and seeing the problems that you see within the institution of the church, where do you find joy in this process?
I find joy in the discovery. I find joy in the journey. So for me, I love to learn new things. So like I'm in a class right now, an online class, and I just learned that John Calvin had a problem with Revelation being a part of the canon. Like, this is a fun fact. I had no idea that this was a thing. So just small little tidbits of information, however they come, I appreciate those things. And they kind of help me keep a fresh paradigm, they help me keep my mind moving forward. Even though my circumstances may not be the best, finding joy in that, like in people as well. Obviously, people like you and my parents, my friends, like those are the places that I find joy and find energy to keep being revitalized to do this work. Because we're both involved in ministry. This podcast is ministry. Like what I do as an educator, that's ministry. So you have to have places and people that can refuel you. Obviously, God is the source of our strength. And so I look to God as well, obviously. But yeah, I think it's important to just have communities, be existing with people. Like I was on Clubhouse last night in a self-care room for Christians. And we were just talking about different ways we do self-care. That is a way I find joy in prioritizing my own mental health, my own well-being. Because that's something I was kind of taught to believe I shouldn't really be doing. I shouldn't really be putting myself first. I should be putting other people first, and I should be thinking of myself less and think about other people more. So just having to unlearn all of that, and then, learn something new again. It's a new way of learning, a new way of being, a new way of existing.
So, would you consider yourself a decolonized Christian, and why?
Um, I'm a decolonizing Christian. I think even for someone who's not decolonizing and you're just a Christian, like you're still on a journey. So the ing on the end of that word, it's a continual thing. Um, and so that is, I feel like I'll always be doing that. I even think, and some people might say this is a white idea, and maybe it is. I don't know, but I'm of the mind. It's just a thought that I had. Like, what if the purpose of sanctification is to lead us to liberation?
Yeah.
What if that is the purpose of sanctification? Not to make us necessarily more more pious, but
Interesting.
to lead us to liberation so that we can then do that for other people. Because I do believe, quite honestly, that if you are not liberated or liberating yourself, you will be oppressing someone else.
Whew. And then when discipleship goes wrong.
Right. Exactly.
Whew. So, what are the ways you are divesting from the traditional Christian perspective, i.e., the things you were taught from early age, or things that you have seen throughout your faith journey? What are some ways you are divesting from this traditional perspective of Christianity that were often peddled?
Yes. So I love that question. One way is kind of what I said earlier when I mentioned the book briefly, just centering Black voices in the literature I choose to read. Because for so long, my base was white conservative men. And I thought that
Mm-hmm.
I felt like they were the gatekeepers of all things Christian. And now I know that is a lie from the abyss of hell. Um, like they are not the gatekeepers. And people will try to make you
Mm-hmm.
think that, but they are simply not the gatekeepers. And I try to be very critical of even some Black authors can have a Eurocentric lens, and I try to be critical of that
Yeah.
as well because I'm trying to divest from all of that, which is really just simply, I think, divesting from that typical Christianity is divesting from white supremacy. So
Yep.
divesting from white supremacy is really what I'm intending to do all the time in whatever way I can. And because I am a scholar, because I do enjoy reading, that is one way that I try to divest. Also, trying to find ways to divest from capitalism, which is hard because I
Yes,
don't
it is.
I don't necessarily know how to do that. Excuse me. I don't know how to do that really. Like I want to know how to do that. I want to, in whatever way, and even if it's the smallest way, like I want to know how to do that. So those are kind of the biggest one is the literature I choose to read, um, and just really teaching people. So I think if I'm divesting from this as a liberated person, then it's now my job to do the same for others. Because again, it's about community. It's not about me. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that is another way to divest when you pour back into other people. Um, because if we understand the narratives we've been pushed as being all about us, to do the opposite is a divestment.
So, what has been a joy of yours as we record this podcast? What thoughts do you have about it? What makes you excited to keep going in this thing as we meet week after week? Despite how tired we are from ministry, something within us allows us to create this space and to have these conversations. And so, what's one thing that you find joy in while recording this podcast?
Really just knowing that it's helping people. As a educator, if you feel like you've helped a child, then that's what you want to do. And knowing that we have gotten the feedback and that people are leaving good reviews and just sharing the podcast, listening to it. I was in a Clubhouse room, same room last night, and a guy was telling me, "Yeah, I started listening to your podcast." And I was like, "Thank you."
That's incredible.
I appreciate that.
Look at God.
So just knowing that it's reaching people and that people are being served by it and that it's serving them well, that is a joy.
What have you learned about yourself throughout this process of creating and diving into the theology and really publicly saying, this is where I'm at in my faith? What have you learned about yourself in this season? Not the podcast season, but in this season of life.
That I still have more to learn.
Point blank, period.
I still have more to learn. It's a journey. It's a journey.
Yeah.
It's a lifelong journey. And you hear that. I mean, if you grow up in traditional settings, you hear that. You're told that, and it's true. It's true for always. So just knowing that I'm not yet there yet. I haven't arrived. I don't claim to know all the answers. And just being humble in that.
Yeah. I so appreciate your heart and your intellect and your wisdom to engage in this process at a high level, but also at a public level. This is never easy as this podcast goes out to the world. We don't know who listens. We don't know the response it gets, but and yet you are constant and you are faithful to decolonizing. And I just want to say, I love you so much for that commitment, staying consistent, even when it's really, really hard. And even the days where we don't want to record or we don't want to engage in a conversation or there's deep trauma that we need to rest from, I always know that you're going to answer that text or pick up that phone call. You're always going to be there to help me dialogue through whatever I'm going through. And so this goes beyond just this platform and these conversations. And so I love you. And is there anything else you want to share with us before we sign off today?
I cannot think of anything. I love you too.
You heard it here first, folks. It's recorded.
I can't. Dudes don't say that enough to each other.
I fully agree.
We have an issue.
Just imagine, real quick, how powerful a tool that is to dismantling toxic masculinity and the hidden emotion of men being willing and ready to accept violence more than love. Love is the great disarmer of that.
Yeah, and I would hypothesize that there's an intersection between homophobia and toxic masculinity.
Ooh, yes, there is.
And that's just the hypothesis. I don't even know that to be true. I ain't read nothing about it.
Oh, it don't matter. You experienced
it. But yeah.
Thanks so much for sharing who you are on this podcast and your thoughts. And I look forward to recording many more episodes with you, my friend. All right, y'all. That's it for today. Catch us next week or in 2 weeks. See, I always say next week, but it's really 2 weeks. So catch us in 2 weeks, and remember that decolonization doesn't happen in a day.
Peace.